Here we go. Hello, middle schoolers. My name is Isaiah Glenn, and I help out leading the youth and family ministry. And here with me is,
Hi, everyone. I'm Gracie Benavides.
and this week we are going to be talking about injustice. And there's been a lot going on in our world today, and injustice is happening all around us. And the bottom line is whenever injustice is happening, whenever you do see it, do what you can to help, right? So let me ask you a question. Have you ever seen something that made you think this isn't right? Or maybe this just isn't fair? We all experience things in our everyday lives that can seem unfair. And then other times it can feel like things were made right. And let me explain what I mean. I'm not sure a lot of you have experienced something similar to this, but let's say that your teacher gives you homework, you go home and your dog does actually eat your homework, and you go back to school and your teacher gives you a 0. Is this fair or unfair, right? Or let's say that, all of your friends, it's a Saturday weekend, all of your friends are going out to the mall, but you can't go to the mall that weekend. Is it fair or unfair? Or let's say that someone gets in trouble in your classroom, and and the teacher, since one person did something wrong, the whole class gets in trouble. Now you guys aren't having your end of the year pizza party, and basically, is it fair or unfair, right? So I think it's usually pretty obvious when a situation is made right, and you feel like all is good in the world and that things are fair for everyone involved. But that heavy feeling that you get in your stomach when you know something isn't fair, the frustration that you experience as you think this isn't right, you describe things that seem wrong or unfair or unequal. It's the opposite of justice, which is what happens when things are made right. Now, I know these may sound like pretty big ideas. You may even be thinking, why should I care about injustice as a middle schooler? Isn't it something that adults deal with? Well, believe it or not, injustice is happening all around you.
Yeah, so I want to share a personal story of my own from when I was in middle school that some of you may or may not relate to. I remember when I was in middle school, I was bullied, and it happened pretty often. And it happened to the point where sometimes I really wouldn't want to go to school. There was a girl who would bully me, and she would say very unkind things to me, sometimes about my race. Sometimes it was very racist. Sometimes it was about my appearance. And I just remember she would do it often, and it was in front of a lot of people, and it made me really upset and hurt. Um, so, thinking about that, I want to ask a few of you a question, or all of you a question. Um, so, how many of you actually like when things are unfair? Probably nobody, right? So, we all like justice because we want things to be fair for everyone, including ourselves. So it's easy to speak up or recognize the way injustice is wrong when it directly impacts us. So some of us have experienced quite a few injustices, and other of us may not have experienced as many as others. So depending on our own situation, it can sometimes be hard to think about what it's like for other people that are going through something that's just unfair. So Isaiah is going to pull up a few unfair situations. So you'll see them on the screen right now. Okay, so what I'd like you to do is look at these unfair situations. So we see bullying, war, abuse, a car accident, all these different things. Look at them. And as we talk about a few other things, I want you to think about what it would be like to experience each of these injustices in your life. So here's the truth. Injustice is happening in our world all the time. Just one look at the news proves that. You know, we have poverty, there's people who are hungry around the world, there's war going on, bullying in schools, there's natural disasters. So when we think about it, it can be really overwhelming. And honestly, if you see and recognize the injustice that are happening in your school or in your community or even around the world, it's hard sometimes to know what you can even do about them. You know they're wrong or that things seem unfair, but as a middle schooler, stepping in to help in any way can make you feel a few different things. All right, maybe you hesitate to help because you feel powerless. You might think, I'm just a middle schooler. What can I really do about these problems? I mean, it's pretty unlikely that you'll be able to solve the injustice of poverty in other parts of the world before you finish 8th grade, right? You know, it's nice to help, but why bother when you know you're powerless to make a real difference right now? Sometimes we avoid speaking out about injustice because it feels risky. Maybe you worry that people will think it's silly to try and get involved in issues of injustice, or maybe you're afraid that you'll fail, that what you try to do to help just won't work. That would be embarrassing, right? Or maybe you're afraid speaking up about injustice in your school will turn the attention to you. If you stand up for the bullied kid, you don't want the bully to come after you next, right? That's a risk you just don't want to take. Or maybe you avoid doing something about injustice because it feels awkward. We want to do something or say something, but we don't know how. It feels awkward to try when we don't even know where to start. You know, I know there's a lot of reasons that keep us frozen when it comes to injustice, but I think there's one reason, a much bigger reason, that could inspire us to do something. To discover what that is, we're going to look at Jesus. So Isaiah's going to show us that.
So, in the book of the Bible called Mark, and it's one of the 4 gospels that tells the story of Jesus during his time on earth. We read about how we can address injustice and need. And as the story starts, you know, Jesus is walking down a road with a massive crowd of people swarming around him. And that happened to Jesus a lot. But just outside the crowd, sitting on the side of the road, was a man named Bartimaeus. Don't know if I said that right, but Bartimaeus, who was blind and begging for help. This guy had been sitting there for years begging for money because it was the only way he could survive. Because he was unable to see, he was unable to work. I think it's safe to say that his life was a little unfair, right? And when Bartimaeus heard Jesus walk by, Bartimaeus cried out to him. In a crowd so big, it would have been easy for anyone to miss just one of many voices calling out for help. But that's what makes what happened next so interesting. When Bartimaeus heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. Many rebuked him and told him to be quiet, but he shouted all the more, Son of David, have mercy on me. Jesus stopped and said, call him. So they called to the blind man, cheer up, on your feet. He's calling you. Throwing his cloak aside, he jumped to his feet and came to Jesus. What do you want me to do for you? Jesus asked, Jesus asked him. The blind man said, Rabbi, I want to see. Go, said Jesus. Your faith has healed you. Immediately, he received his sight and followed Jesus along the road. Think about this for a second. This was Jesus surrounded by a massive crowd of people. And what did he do? By this account, he stopped and helped just one. You see, Jesus saw people's needs all the time, but he didn't just stop at seeing. Jesus acted. He did what he could to help. And on this day, Jesus saw one need that he knew he could meet right then and there, and so he did. So how does this apply to our lives and the injustices in our world today, right? Well, one of the most common reasons we don't help people is because we don't notice them or their needs. We can ignore injustice because it's not impacting us directly, or because we don't take the time to really notice it, or because we don't know what to do about it. Rather than look out and see it, we simply stop noticing. But that's not what Jesus modeled for us here. Jesus looked out and he saw, Jesus saw a need, like he saw injustice, and Jesus acted. He did what he did his best to help, and he started with just one person. And that's what he and that's what Jesus wants us to do. When we see injustice in our world, he wants us to do what we can to help. While God might not work through us to give sight to a blind man, though we can totally ask him. And really, how cool would that be that you heal, Billy, who was sitting next to you, in your classroom, right? We can look at, or we can look out at the needs and injustices all around us, and we can choose to start with just one person, and it's what Jesus is calling us to do. So when you see injustice, do what you can to help. So you may ask the question, well, where do I start? Well, this week I want to encourage you to start looking out for the needs all around you by doing two things. One, pray. Ask God to help you see people the way Jesus did. Pray that God would help you see the needs of others, especially those who are experiencing injustice, because trust me, if you simply, I'm gonna cut that part out. I'm gonna start over, okay? Here we go. One, pray. Ask God to help you see people the way Jesus did. Pray that God would help you see the needs of others, especially those who are experiencing injustice. Because trust me, if you simply ask Him, I think God will show you all the needs around you and the injustices in your home, at your school, on your team, and in your community, and even in the world around you. Two, pick one. Just start with one. Remember, when you see an injustice, do what you can to help. So start with just one thing you see that doesn't seem fair or right. Ask yourself, what can I do about this? Maybe you can find a way to help the kid at school who doesn't seem to have friends, or maybe you can offer, or maybe you can offer to help a family member because you've noticed that they do most of the work in your house, right? Or maybe you can donate to a charity or volunteer somewhere to help you, or excuse me, to help a need in your community. You might not be able to solve the problem, but you can do something. You can start with just one, just like Jesus did. Thank you guys, and that's the lesson for today.
Bye, guys.